Case number 1. Andrea Reyes. On October 5, 1999, in Connecticut, a family's world was turned upside down when 23-month-old Andrea Reyes vanished without a trace. Despite immediate efforts to locate her, the case quickly stalled. And as the years passed, Andrea remained missing. Andrea Michelle Reyes was born in 1997. When she was 23 months old, her parents, Carlos Reyes and Rosa Tenorio, were married, but their relationship was troubled. They faced numerous issues in their marriage, which eventually led to their decision to part ways. The separation, however, was not without conflict, as both parents struggled over who would gain custody of their child. As tensions escalated, the custody battle made its way to court. After legal proceedings, the judge ruled in favor of Andrea's father, granting him sole custody. On October 5, 1999, an unimaginable event shook Andrea's family. Andrea, who was living with her father in New Haven, Connecticut, was taken from her home. The authorities were immediately notified, and an investigation was launched. Law enforcement officers began gathering evidence, speaking with neighbors, and searching the surrounding areas for any sign of Andrea. Authorities quickly identified Andrea's mother, Rosa, as the primary suspect in the abduction. Since she did not have legal custody of her daughter, investigators believed she had taken Andrea and fled to Mexico, specifically to the city of Puebla. Despite immediate efforts to locate them, including issuing an arrest warrant for custodial interference, authorities were unable to track Tenorio down. As time passed without new leads, the case gradually went cold, and Andrea remained missing for decades. Although the search efforts slowed, Andrea's father never gave up hope. He refused to accept the possibility that his daughter was gone forever and remained determined to bring her home. Over the years, he made multiple trips to Mexico, following leads that suggested his daughter was still living there under the care of her mother. In 2023, 24 years later, the New Haven Police Department made the decision to reopen the cold case. The authorities were determined to revisit old leads and utilize modern investigative techniques. Through a combination of interviews, search warrants, and the use of social media, investigators were able to track Andrea's possible whereabouts. Their efforts eventually led them to Puebla, Mexico, where they believed Andrea had been living for years. As authorities worked to confirm her identity, they partnered with Othram. Given the complexity of the case and the passage of time, DNA analysis was the most reliable method to determine whether the woman found in Puebla was indeed Andrea Reyes. In March 2025, Othram completed the DNA testing and officially confirmed Andrea's identity. With her identity verified, 27-year-old Andrea was given the opportunity to reunite with her father. After decades of separation, the long-awaited moment was finally within reach. The emotional reunion marked the end of a painful chapter in their lives and the beginning of a new one. Andrea has been able to reunite with her father after decades of separation, but she has not relocated to the United States. She continues to reside in Mexico, the country where she spent most of her life after being taken from her home as a child. While her reunion with her father has been confirmed, many details about her current life remain private. The nature of her relationship with her mother, Rosa Tenorio, is still unclear, and it is unknown whether the two remain in contact. Despite the legal barriers, law enforcement officials continue to monitor the case, keeping Tenorio's fugitive status active in official records. While her whereabouts are suspected, there has been no confirmation of her exact location or any immediate plans to bring her back to the U.S. to face charges. Without cooperation from Mexican authorities, efforts to extradite her remain stalled. Moving on to the next case. Case number 2. Calvin Wilhite Jr. In May 2015, Army Sergeant Calvin Wilhite Jr. and his fiancée were walking through downtown Memphis, Tennessee, when their night took a tragic turn. For nearly a decade, Calvin's family was left without justice. Army Sergeant Calvin Wilhite Jr. was born in 1989. From an early age, he had a strong sense of duty, which led him to join an American army. As a soldier, he demonstrated unwavering dedication, rising through the ranks to become a sergeant. Over the course of 8 years, Calvin served honorably, including a deployment to Iraq, where he faced the harsh realities of war and survived. He was engaged to his fiancée, with whom he shared 2 children. He embraced fatherhood with pride, ensuring that his children were well cared for. On the night of May 24, 2015, Calvin and his fiancée were walking through downtown Memphis, Tennessee, after spending the evening on Beale Street. The popular entertainment district was bustling with activity, filled with music, laughter, and crowds enjoying the night. As the couple made their way along South 4th Street, near the FedEx Forum, their peaceful walk took a sudden and dangerous turn. A dark-colored vehicle approached, carrying 3 men inside. Instead of passing by, the men directed their attention toward Calvin's fiancée, yelling remarks at her. The situation quickly escalated when Calvin, unwilling to ignore the harassment, confronted them. What began as an exchange of words soon became a heated argument. Tensions rose in an instant and the night took a fatal turn. One of the men inside the vehicle suddenly produced a firearm. Before Calvin had a chance to react, gunfire erupted. He was struck 3 times, collapsing onto the pavement as his fiancée watched in horror. The attack was swift and merciless, leaving bystanders shocked and unable to intervene. The sounds of the gunshots echoed through the streets, cutting through the usual city noise. At approximately 12:05 a.m., officers from the Memphis Police Department's Entertainment District Unit responded to reports of the shooting. When the authorities arrived, they found Calvin lying on the ground, critically wounded. The scene was chaotic, with bystanders in shock and confusion. The assailants wasted no time fleeing the scene, speeding off in their vehicle and disappearing into the night. The vehicle fled southbound, crossing Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, disappearing into the night. The attack had been swift and calculated, leaving little opportunity for intervention. Emergency responders worked quickly to get Calvin medical attention. He was rushed to Regional 1 Hospital, where doctors and medical staff fought to save his life. Despite their efforts, the injuries he sustained were too severe. The gunshot wounds had inflicted irreversible damage. And shortly after his arrival, Calvin was pronounced deceased. The life of a devoted soldier, father, and fiancé was stolen in an instant. Following his end, an investigation was launched to identify the perpetrators after the Shelby County Medical Examiner officially confirmed that Calvin had been deliberately and violently taken from his family. Law enforcement officers scoured the area for evidence, reviewing surveillance footage and interviewing witnesses. The authorities worked tirelessly to gather information about the suspects. Witnesses provided descriptions of the 2 men involved in the fatal shooting. The driver was described as a black male between 22 and 25 years old, with a light complexion, hazel eyes, and a distinctive high fade hairstyle with curls on top. His accomplice, the shooter, was also a black male of the same age range, but had a darker complexion and a chubby face. He wore his hair in a fade style and had a small to medium build. The details of their appearance became critical leads in the case, offering investigators a starting point in their pursuit of justice. The shooter's actions were particularly chilling. He had positioned himself on the passenger door frame of the vehicle as it moved down the street, making him more visible to bystanders. He wore a white t-shirt, which stood out under the street lights. With calculated precision, he fired the fatal shots before the car sped away. The brazenness of the attack left many shaken, as it demonstrated the shooter's willingness to take a life in a public setting without hesitation. The investigators also focused on the vehicle involved in the crime. Witnesses described it as a light green or gray 4-door sedan, potentially a mid-2000s Dodge Stratus, Ford Taurus, or a similar model. This information was crucial in narrowing the search, but the lack of a visible license plate or identifying marks made tracking the vehicle difficult. Surveillance footage was reviewed in hopes of capturing clearer images of the suspects or the car, but results were inconclusive. The men responsible had vanished into the night. A $20,000 reward was offered for information leading to their arrest. A significant incentive meant to motivate witnesses or those who may have had contact with the perpetrators. Despite efforts from law enforcement, the case went cold. Then in May 2024, almost a decade later, a breakthrough finally came. After years of little progress, detectives finally received new information regarding a suspect's potential involvement in the case. This crucial lead reignited the investigation and provided a long-awaited opportunity to move forward. In February 2025, the investigation ultimately led to the arrest of a suspect identified as 33-year-old Timothy Davis. Law enforcement officials confirmed that he had been taken into custody, marking a pivotal moment in the nearly decade-old case. Davis was formally charged in the second degree. The court set his bond at $250,000, marking a significant development in the long unsolved case. While his arrest provided a breakthrough, questions remained about the full scope of his involvement and whether additional suspects would also be brought to justice. The investigators continued working to determine if Davis was the gunman or if he played another role in the crime. In a statement to the Wilhite family, the deputy chief of police acknowledged their years of suffering. He expressed deep sympathy for the pain and grief they had endured since that tragic night in 2015. He said, "To the Wilhite family, we know the past several years have been filled with grief and uncertainty. While we cannot undo the pain that you have endured, we hope that knowing someone is now being held accountable brings you some measure of relief and help in your healing process." For Calvin's mother, Davis's arrest was an important step, but it did not erase the sorrow of losing her son. She remained focused on the fact that another suspect was still out there, walking free after nearly a decade. She expressed her frustration that it had taken so long for justice to reach this point, knowing that someone out there had information that could have brought closure much sooner. She said, "We just wanted justice to come for my son, because we knew that somebody that knew of the cowards that took my son's life was out here." While Davis's arrest brings a measure of relief, the case is not yet fully closed, as at least one suspect remains at large. The pursuit of justice continues. And for Calvin's loved ones, the fight is not over until everyone involved in his tragic demise is brought before the law. Moving on to the next case. Case number 3, Rose and Sturtz. The 1975 cold case of a Maryland woman was finally solved with the help of an old cassette tape and a photo of the victim. On August 24, 1975, 20-year-old Roseanne Sturtz was strangled after meeting someone at TikTok Club on Utah Street in downtown Baltimore, Maryland. A relative reported her missing later that evening. Her body was found 4 months later in December in a wooded area of Columbia. The case was a mystery for decades until the Howard County Police revived it 49 years after the crime in late 2024. They uncovered evidence that a convicted perpetrator, already in prison, had committed the crime. The detectives discovered a 1981 audio tape in which Charles William Davis Jr., then incarcerated at Jessup Correctional Institute, was asked about the case in exchange for not facing charges. In 1981, Davis could not identify Roseanne, who went by and as one of his victims after he was shown a photo taken of her several years before the crime took place. Davis landed on the authorities' radar in 1981 after the police studied his confirmed victims and compared them to Roseanne. But Howard County Police Corporal Wade Zuffel then brought Davis from the same jail to the police headquarters in 2024 to interview him again 44 years later. He showed Davis a later photo of Roseanne, a headshot taken a month before her life was ended. This time, he identified her as one of his victims and admitted to the slaying. Footage released from the interview shows Davis nodding his head as he took a look at the photo. Roseanne's family said the following in a statement through the police department. In November 2024, we were grateful to have all the case details, learned Roseanne's actual date of demise, and received the closure we have been praying for all these years, finally put to rest the answers we never had. 77-year-old Davis told the police that after meeting Roseanne at a bar, The pair got into an argument before he took her life. Davis cannot be charged in this case, but he is already in prison for life for other crimes. Corporal Zufall said his main reason why he wanted to talk to me was he wanted to give closure to the family. The case was finally declared solved 5 decades later in March 2025. Moving on to the next case. Case number 4. Ranjani. In February 2006 in India, a young mother and her newborn twin daughters were found brutally slain in their rented home. The scene was one of unimaginable horror. Despite an immediate investigation and promising leads, the case quickly grew cold and the suspects disappeared without a trace. Ranjani was born in 1981 in Alayaman, a village nestled in the Kollam district of Kerala, India. By her early 20s, Ranjani had entered into a relationship with Daival Kumar, a man from the same village. Daival served in the Indian Army, which lent him a certain standing and respect within their community. Their connection developed over time, and despite the limited details available about the nature of their relationship, it became serious enough to draw attention from those around them. However, the nature of their relationship began to shift when Ranjani became pregnant. This marked a turning point. Upon learning about the pregnancy, Daival's attitude towards her noticeably changed. He grew distant and indifferent, signaling a troubling shift in his commitment. Daival, unwilling to take responsibility, returned to his army post in Patankat, distancing himself not only physically, but emotionally from Ranjani. On January 24, 2006, Ranjani gave birth to twin daughters at a hospital in Tiruvananthapuram. Daival refused to acknowledge the children as his, firmly denying paternity. Determined to seek justice and hold him accountable, Ranjani approached the state government, urging them to intervene. Her efforts led to an official order requiring Daival to undergo a DNA test to establish whether he was indeed the father of the twins. On February 10th, just over 2 weeks after the birth of her twins, 24-year-old Ranjani and her newborn daughter's lifeless bodies were found in their rented home. Their throats had been slit, a scene of unimaginable violence and cruelty. It was Ranjani's mother, Santama, who discovered the horrific scene. Overcome with shock and disbelief, she immediately alerted the police. Police officers arrived promptly at the scene. The immediate area was cordoned off, and the investigation began in earnest. Amid the initial sweep of the home, the officers recovered an RC book, a registration certificate for a vehicle. At first glance, it did not appear to be a crucial piece of evidence. Still, the officers made note of it and decided to trace its origin, hoping it might lead to a breakthrough in the case. Upon tracing the RC book, the police identified its registered owner. When questioned, the individual revealed that he had handed over his two-wheeler to a resale shop located in Srikaryam, Tiruvananthapuram. The police quickly followed up at the shop where the staff disclosed that the vehicle had been sold to 2 men. They described one as fair in complexion and the other as having a beard. Though vague, this description gave the investigators their first real lead. Based on the physical description and prior information, the police began to suspect that one of the men was Daival Kumar. His connection to Ranjani, the timing of the crime, and his recent denial of paternity all added to the suspicion. However, the identity of the second man remained a mystery. Further details began to emerge when Ranjani's mother, Santama, shared a crucial piece of information. She recalled a man named Anil, whom she had met at the hospital around the time of the twins' birth. This man had often visited their home afterward, offering assistance and appearing helpful to both her and Ranjani. As the investigation deepened, the authorities confirmed Daival Kumar's identity and involvement in the case. Cross-referencing details led to a chilling discovery. The man who had introduced himself as Anil was not who he claimed to be. The police concluded that it was an alias. During the course of the investigation, it came to light that one of the suspects had used an ATM, a detail that would prove to be a key turning point. Bank records traced to Patankat revealed the identity of the second individual as Rajesh, a colleague of Daival in the Indian Army. With this information, the circle around the suspects began to tighten. Though both men were initially questioned by the police, they managed to slip through the cracks. Shortly after, Dival absconded, effectively disappearing from official reach. As the investigation stalled, the army formally declared both Dival and Rajesh as deserters. With no leads and the suspects evading justice, the case gradually faded from the spotlight and went cold. In 2010, after 4 long years of inaction and growing frustration, Santama approached the Kerala High Court and pleaded for a renewed investigation. As a result, the case was officially handed over to the Central Bureau of Investigation. Unlike earlier phases, the CBI utilized more advanced tools and resources to pick up the trail that had gone cold. A major breakthrough came years later, driven by a combination of advanced artificial intelligence technology and relentless detective work. The CBI's technical intelligence wing used AI-generated facial mapping to create potential matches based on old photographs of the suspects. These digitally aged images were then compared with available photos on social media platforms, a method that had rarely been used in earlier stages of the case. The strategy paid off when a close visual match was found online. The AI-generated images aligned closely with photos on social media, which had gone unnoticed for years. This digital footprint, once dormant, reignited hope for justice. The match was strong enough to prompt immediate action. The CBI's Chennai unit was alerted and quickly moved in to verify the findings. On January 4, 2025, the Central Bureau of Investigation arrested the 2 primary suspects in Puducherry. After nearly 2 decades in hiding, Dival and Rajesh were found living under false identities. 42-year-old Dival had assumed the name Vishnu, while 48-year-old Rajesh went by the alias Praveen Kumar. The men had managed to build entirely new lives, working as interior designers and even marrying local school teachers, blending into the fabric of their adopted community without suspicion. It was revealed that Rajesh had manipulated Santama, Ranjini's mother, in the days leading up to the crime. Under the pretense of assisting her with official paperwork, Rajesh took her to the local Panchayat office, claiming he would help obtain birth certificates for the newborn twins. This deception was carefully planned, meant to remove Santama from the home and leave Ranjini and the babies vulnerable. While Santama was away, Rajesh returned to the house. Following their arrest, Dival and Rajesh were immediately taken into custody. The court remanded them to judicial custody, marking a crucial step in holding them accountable for the crimes. After nearly 2 decades, their family finally has a measure of closure. While the pain of their loss remains, the path to justice has begun. Moving on to the next case. Case number 5. Barbara Lentz. An Iowa man has been charged in a 1989 cold case disappearance, the first case to see an arrest from the state attorney general's new cold case unit. On May 6, 1989, Barbara Lentz went missing at the age of 31 after being dropped off at her Woodbine apartment in Iowa by her then-boyfriend, Robert Davis. She was expected to visit her former boyfriend and the father of her 3-year-old child in Omaha, Nebraska. But she did not show up. Barbara's family contacted the Woodbine Police Department on May 17th after they have not had any contact with her since May 3rd. The police and her family members entered Barbara's apartment, but she was not home and they found that her pets had not been cared for in some time. Her personal effects, including her purse, wallet, clothing, luggage, etc., were there, indicating a lack of preparation for a long absence. There was no sign of any struggle, and nothing appeared to be missing or out of place. Barbara had not told anyone in her family or her friends that she was planning to leave or go anywhere. The police determined that Robert was the last person to have seen Barbara alive. He told the investigators that she had called him from Omaha to say that she was with her daughter, but the police determined that she never arrived there. During the course of the investigation, the police found that Barbara had told several people that she feared Robert. Shortly before her disappearance, Barbara told at least 2 people that Robert said that he would end her life if she left him. Barbara was also allegedly assaulted by Robert on several known occasions during their 2-year relationship, including incidents during which she was allegedly strangled until she fell unconscious. There was also an incident where Robert allegedly hit Barbara's daughter at a restaurant in front of Barbara and other witnesses. Robert admitted these incidents to the police. He told the police that he did not like it when she went to Nebraska to visit Lindsay and Lindsay's father. He also said that he and Barbara argued before her May 6th visit. One witness alleged that Robert injured Barbara after slashing her cheek with a sharp object, while another claimed that they saw the two leaving the apartment. The witness who saw Robert injure Barbara saw him at a local bar in Woodbine the same evening. The witness said, during this encounter, Robert claimed to be looking for Barbara and he could not find her. The witness said that his behavior seemed misplaced because Robert had just left the bar with Barbara a short time earlier. A different witness later informed the investigators that shortly after Barbara's disappearance, they saw Robert and his brother bury something in a rural area near Robert's home. Robert's brother visited the property with the witness and showed the witness where he had dug a hole for his brother and helped him bury something wrapped in plastic. The complaint did not say if the area was excavated or what was wrapped in the plastic. Other witnesses told the investigators that Robert told them they would end up like Barbara after arguments. Barbara's remains were not found and the case went cold. Finally, after 17 years of no answers, a lead came through after mushroom hunters found the skeletal remains of a woman in a 55-gallon barrel that were thought to be Barbara. Dental records later determined that it was not Barbara. The case was then reopened and reinvestigated. Because of Richard Davis's behavior and history with Barbara, the investigators believe that he ended Barbara's life with malice of forethought, willfully, deliberately, and with premeditation. He was then arrested on March 10, 2025. He was charged in the first degree. An attorney was not listed for him. Barbara's daughter, Lindsay Baumgart, said that Davis's arrest was very surreal and something that I have waited for my whole life. She said the following, "I never thought this day would come," and added that she hopes investigators can finally locate her mother's remains. "Justice for me would be bringing my mama home." Court documents stated that Davis filed a written plea of not guilty on April 5th and waived his right to a speedy trial. He is currently being held in the Harrison County Jail. No court date has yet been set. Moving on to the next case. Case number 6. Pamela Lee Walton. In the summer of 1988, a transgender woman vanished from Lexington, Kentucky after a prostitution charge was dropped. Her remains were discovered months later in Florida. She became Julie Doe, a nameless victim. Decades passed before DNA testing and forensic work revealed her true identity. On September 25, 1988, a man searching for lumber made a grim discovery off County Road 474 near the border of Lake and Polk counties in Florida. While walking through the area, he came across human remains lying just off the roadway. Startled by the sight, he quickly contacted law enforcement to report what he had found. The authorities responded promptly, arriving at the scene to begin a formal investigation into the circumstances surrounding the body's presence. Upon arrival, the investigators examined the scene closely. The victim was found wearing a bluish-green tank top and an acid-washed denim skirt. The police observed that the victim's pantyhose had been partially removed, raising the possibility that an indecent assault may have occurred. The absence of shoes, jewelry, or any form of personal identification added to the growing suspicion that foul play was involved. The immediate surroundings yielded no clues to the victim's identity. There were no belongings or items nearby that might have offered insight into who she was or how she ended up there. The investigators noted that the condition of the remains and the secluded location suggested the body may have been deliberately placed at the site. Due to the advanced decomposition, authorities were unable to determine an exact time of demise, though it was estimated to have occurred anywhere from 2 weeks to 8 months prior to discovery. The condition of the remains made visual identification impossible. Without external injuries or clear trauma, It was difficult for officials to piece together the sequence of events leading to her demise. The following morning, an autopsy was conducted at the C.A. Pound Human Identification Laboratory in Gainesville, Florida. Experts hoped the examination would reveal more definitive answers about the cause of demise and perhaps yield clues to the victim's identity. However, the autopsy failed to provide a clear cause of demise, leaving the medical examiner without a conclusive explanation for how or why the woman had lost her life. Further examination of the victim's remains revealed that she had undergone multiple cosmetic surgeries. She had 250 cc silicone breast implants, a size considered proportionate to her frame. The investigators suggested the procedure could have taken place in major metropolitan areas known for plastic surgery such as Atlanta, Miami, New Orleans, New York City, or various locations in California. These implants, which had been discontinued around 1983, led experts to estimate that the surgery was performed around 1984. In addition to breast augmentation, the victim also appeared to have undergone rhinoplasty. This surgical alteration to the nose may have been cosmetic or a corrective procedure related to a previous nasal injury. These surgeries further pointed to the victim's efforts to affirm her gender identity through medical transition, which was considerably less common and far more stigmatized in the 1980s than it is today. Initially, medical professionals examining the remains believed the victim was a cisgender woman. This belief stemmed from certain physical characteristics, including pitting on the pelvic bones, which is often associated with hormonal changes typically seen in individuals who have experienced pregnancy. However, this assumption was later disproven after advanced DNA testing. In 2015, almost 3 decades later, DNA analysis revealed that the victim possessed XY chromosomes, confirming that she had been assigned male at birth. The presence of hormone replacement therapy in her system had caused subtle skeletal changes, which initially led to the incorrect conclusion regarding pregnancy. With no identification found at the scene, a forensic sketch was created to approximate what she may have looked like in life. In July 2018, additional forensic work was conducted by the University of South Florida in Tampa. Isotopic testing was performed on samples taken from the victim's skull with the goal of narrowing down regions where she may have lived. Results from these tests pointed towards southern Florida as her likely place of origin, adding weight to the theory that she had spent much of her life in the state, despite having ancestral roots in Kentucky. Law enforcement officials working the case began to publicly acknowledge the difficulties she likely faced as a transgender woman during the 1980s. Other investigators speculated that rejection or estrangement from family could have left her socially isolated, which may explain why no missing persons reports matched her description for decades. After it was determined that the victim was a transgender woman, the Sheriff's Department commissioned a new forensic sketch. This updated rendering was developed from the structure of her skull and was intended to more accurately reflect her gender presentation. Then, after another 6 years, in September 2024, a breakthrough came when the DNA Doe project revealed that the victim had ancestral connections to central Kentucky. Specifically, her lineage was traced to Madison, Fayette, Garrett, and Mercer counties. This information significantly narrowed the geographic scope for the investigators seeking to identify her and offered a stronger lead on her origins. Despite her genetic links to central Kentucky, records and data suggested that the victim had lived most of her life in Florida. This geographical separation hinted at the possibility that she had not been raised by her biological family. Shortly after the discovery of the unidentified remains, the authorities collected fingerprints in an attempt to establish the victim's identity. After years of determined work by forensic genealogists, significant progress was made. Using advanced genetic techniques, researchers identified potential relatives of the victim, who had long been referred to as Julie Doe. The Lake County Sheriff's Office reached out to these individuals, and after gathering more information, DNA samples were submitted for comparison. On March 10, 2025, the long-standing mystery was finally resolved when the remains were officially identified as those of Pamela Lee Walton. Pamela was born on May 13, 1963 in the state of Kentucky. Assigned male at birth, she was put up for adoption at the age of 5. After being adopted, her name was legally changed to Lee Allen Walton. As an adult, Lee transitioned and began living as Pamela Lee Walton. She identified as a transgender woman. Pamela's early life and background were marked by numerous challenges, particularly those linked to her gender identity. She experienced ridicule and exclusion, including derogatory references made in her high school yearbooks. A particularly haunting detail from her past included a pre-carved headstone that still bore her former name, symbolizing both a rejection of her chosen identity and a painful reminder of the discrimination she endured. In the mid-1980s, Pamela became estranged from her adoptive family following a dispute involving a theft from a family member. This falling out appeared to deepen the divide between her and the people who had once taken her in. Around July 6, 1988, Pamela was arrested in Lexington, Kentucky on a single charge of prostitution. While the solicitation portion of the charge was eventually dropped, the arrest stands as one of the last verified moments in her known timeline. Following her arrest, Pamela vanished without a trace. No one heard from her again, and despite time passing, her whereabouts remained unknown. Despite confirming her identity, many questions remain unanswered. It is still unknown how Pamela came to be in the area of Florida where her body was discovered. Furthermore, her exact cause and manner of demise remain undetermined. The Lake County Sheriff's Office has stated that efforts are ongoing to gather more information about the circumstances that led to Pamela's demise, as the investigators continue seeking answers to complete the story of her life and final days. Moving on to the next case. Case number 7. Carol Hemphill. On the night of July 27, 2001 in Missouri, a devoted mother and wife vanished without a trace after telling her daughter she was heading to the store. The case was initially linked to a notorious serial offender, but the breakthrough would only happen more than 2 decades later. Carol Hemphill was born on June 10, 1962. At 39 years old, she was married and the proud mother of 2 daughters. On the night of July 27, 2001, in St. Louis, Missouri, she told her daughter that she was heading to the store, but never returned. There were no initial signs of trouble, making the situation even more puzzling. As the hours turned into days, Carol's family grew increasingly worried. They reported her missing to the authorities, hoping for any leads that could explain her sudden vanishing. The police launched an investigation, speaking to friends, family, and local store employees to gather any possible information. However, there were no witnesses who could confirm seeing Carol after she left her home that night. Her car was also unaccounted for. Her family tirelessly searched for answers, distributing flyers, and pleading with the public for any information. Local news stations covered her case, amplifying the urgency of her disappearance. Despite their efforts, there were no immediate breakthroughs. Law enforcement suspected that Carol had fallen victim to Maury Troy Travis, a notorious serial offender. Travis was linked to multiple crimes in the St. Louis area, preying on vulnerable women and torturing his victims in his home. Given the circumstances of Carol's disappearance, the authorities believed that there was a strong possibility that she had been one of his victims. However, without definitive proof, they could not confirm the connection at the time. Carol's husband revealed that Travis was not a stranger to their community. He was a familiar figure in the neighborhood where their family lived, making the possibility of his involvement even more unsettling. Adding to the growing concerns, Carol's daughter recalled that a close acquaintance of a family member had seen Travis in their area. Travis is believed to have ended the lives of between 12 and 20 women across Missouri and Illinois between February and February 2002. However, despite the overwhelming evidence found in his home, including torture videos and maps of possible burial sites, Travis never admitted to any of the crimes. Before the authorities could press charges for all the suspected crimes, Travis took his own life. On June 10, 2002, While being held at the St. Louis County Jail in Clayton, Missouri, he hanged himself in his cell at the age of 36. His passing robbed many families of the chance to confront him in court and receive direct answers about their loved ones. And the case of Carol went cold. Nearly 8 months after Carol Hemphill's disappearance, a grim discovery was made. On March 28, 2002, Illinois Department of Transportation, IDOT workers stumbled upon human remains in a creek bed along Route 3 near Gull Road in Columbia, Illinois. The authorities launched an investigation, but were initially unable to determine the identity of the remains. With no immediate forensic leads, the case remained open as the investigators worked to uncover the truth. 2 decades later, in 2022, a breakthrough opportunity emerged when a grant provided funding for genetic genealogy research. This innovative approach, which had helped solve other cold cases, offered new hope for identifying the remains. As part of this effort, portions of the remains were sent to a specialized lab at the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification. Scientists at the facility worked to extract viable DNA with the goal of connecting her genetic profile to potential relatives. In late October 2024, a major breakthrough finally came in Carol Hemphill's case. After years of uncertainty, a lab report revealed a close genetic connection between the remains and a DNA sample from her deceased biological son. This critical finding brought new hope that her identity could finally be confirmed. To strengthen the results, living family members were asked to submit their own DNA for further comparison, ensuring the most accurate identification possible. Months of detailed forensic analysis followed, as scientists worked to verify the match. Finally, on February 24, 2025, the final lab results conclusively confirmed that the remains discovered in the creek bed over 2 decades earlier belonged to Carol Hemphill. On March 14, 2025, the Columbia Police Department publicly announced the official identification of Carol. The confirmation was a significant development in a case that had remained unsolved for nearly 24 years. The authorities continued to suspect that Carol was a victim of Maury Troy Travis, given the timeline of her disappearance and the proximity of her remains to areas associated with him. However, without a direct confession or definitive physical evidence linking him to this crime, law enforcement could not close the case. Patricia Hemphill, Carol's daughter, said, "It is a bittersweet moment. It means a lot. It still hurts pretty bad. I have been waiting for this day for a long time." She said these words while holding something she has longed for, her mother's ashes. A tangible piece of the woman she has spent decades searching for. Along with them, the memories that time could never erase. She said, "God finally answered all my prayers. But in her mind, it is not over yet." She explained, "I definitely want justice. This is just halfway. We are not at the end until justice is served. For whoever it is, they did whatever they did. I want justice. And I know these guys. They're going to keep working on it." Ricky Hemphill, Carol's husband, who is now 63 and now lives in Houston, said that he went to lay down after dinner on the night his wife was last seen by loved ones. He was 18 when he first met his wife and said she was a loving person. He said, "Everybody loved her and she loved everybody. She really was an open person. She was a happy person. She was a wonderful woman." Moving on to the next case. Case number 8. Greg Kelly. 2 football players lived in the same home in Texas and looked very similar to one another. One of them indecently assaulted young boys, and the other one got the blame and was sentenced to 25 years in prison due to the police detectives not investigating the case properly. 18-year-old Greg Kelly, the Cedar Park, Texas football star, on his way to a full scholarship, was found guilty of indecently assaulting 2 4-year-old boys. Because Greg's parents had medical issues and could not drive, he was staying at the home of his best friend and teammate, Jonathan McCarty, who lived across the street from Leander High School. The 2 18-year-olds had an uncanny resemblance. Greg was arrested in 2013 in his senior year in high school based on an indecent abuse allegation by a 4-year-old child that was in the daycare at the McCarty home run by Jonathan's mother. Greg was considered the only suspect in the case by the lead detective, Christopher Daly. Although Jonathan was also living in the home, and there were other football players that also came in and out of the home, Detective Daly never went to the home where the assault happened. The police never stepped foot inside the daycare. The child described the room where the assault happened and the pajamas the man was wearing. The child said the man that assaulted him played football and his name was Greg. Daly's reasoning for not going into the home to investigate was that he believed the statement of the 4-year-old child in the CPS interview. By not going to the house, investigating the scene of the crime and comparing it to the child's statements, he did nothing to prove that Greg did anything wrong, but he pushed on with the arrest and took the case to court anyway. The only testimony against Greg was the words of a 4-year-old boy who said someone named Greg molested him. However, nobody showed him a photo of Greg or asked him to visually identify his assailant. The authorities also never questioned others in the house at the time to see if it might have been someone else who looked like Greg or just called themselves Greg. Greg was not even living there at the supposed time of the incident. One of the boys who was allegedly assaulted testified that Greg did not do anything to him. Greg's lawyer, Patricia Cummings, never moved beyond her one strategy. She wanted to prove that the assault never happened at all. She said that if she introduced Jonathan McCarty as a potential alternate suspect, it would mean admitting that something happened. Her defense strategy was that the incident did not happen, period. Even after seeing all the evidence that could prove Greg's innocence, however, she still stuck to her original strategy, even when a different route likely had a better chance of proving her client's innocence. There were also questions surrounding Cummings and her friendship with Jonathan McCarty's family, which made Williamson County District Attorney Sean Dick wonder if that was why she did not want to suggest that Jonathan might have been a logical suspect as well. This proved costly because she lost. It only took 12 hours of deliberations for the jury to find Greg, an innocent man, guilty of 2 counts of super aggravated indecent assault. The most shocking moment with Sergeant Daly and his interview with the second child was not the interview itself, which he later admitted was a leading interview with suggestive wording and leading questions. The biggest problem with this interview with the frightened child was the fact that the boy's parents purportedly never actually came forward to report any presumed indecent abuse. Rather, Sergeant Daly cold called them and noted that indecent abuse was reported at their daycare and that he wanted to talk to the son. The parents were quick to oblige out of fear. Despite this leading interview and the fact that Sergeant Daly refused to investigate the supposed crime scene, he said later that he thinks he did a good job in the investigation and that he stands by the child's claims. That second boy testified in the court case and said Greg did not do anything to him. But it was not enough to save Greg from his original conviction. The daycare owner also testified and said she did not believe Greg did it. It was no secret that Greg and Jonathan, who had already been in trouble with the law, looked similar. So the fact that Greg was convicted based solely on a child's testimony and his name seems puzzling. The original case had almost no evidence. But in 2014, the courts convicted Greg of the crime and sentenced him to prison for 25 years with no chance for parole. But the case did not end there. If Daly went to the home to investigate, he would have learned that Jonathan actually owned the pair of pajamas the child said the assailant was wearing. And the room that the child described was the bedroom that matched Jonathan's bedroom, not Greg's. The fact that Daly chose not to go to the house to investigate and look around means that he had no idea the bedroom was Jonathan's. The police refused to question Jonathan, who was the man who actually did indecently assault the child. Instead, they made Greg the only suspect and allowed Jonathan to remain not investigated and around other children. Greg's girlfriend, Gabri Anderson, never gave up on him. They have been sweethearts since they were in grade school. She was willing to wait 25 years for him to get out of jail to be with him. And she never wavered in her love for the young man. Gabri completely believed in his innocence, no matter the circumstance. And she was there for him when he got out. Gabri got her devotion from her father, who also happened to be Greg's high school football coach. His coach believed in him so much that he cried while being interviewed and told anyone who would listen that Greg was innocent. Gabra's dad also helped bring in Jake Bryden, who helped get the case reopened. As for Gabra, she said, "I had no doubt in my mind. I knew what kind of person he was." Construction worker Jake Bryden showed up. He did not know Greg Kelly and did not know much about the case. He just knew that what he saw and read in the news about a seemingly innocent 19-year-old who was going to jail for a heinous crime he purportedly did not commit was wrong. Dubbing himself an activist, Jake called Greg's mother and started raising awareness to have the case looked at again. He said that all he knew was that Greg was dating his former coach's daughter, Gabri Anderson, and he believed in his coach's sense of character. Jake said, "I saw my old coach on the news. I know him to be a man of great character. And he was always our leadership teacher in high school and taught a leadership class. And I was like, why is he on screen crying for a convicted criminal?" When Jake got involved, he got the attention of people who could do something about it. He hired a private investigator to look into the case at the same time that District Attorney Sean Dick began to question its validity. Since the case was reopened, Jake did not stop fighting for Greg. Through dealing with her own illness, the illness of her husband followed by his demise in 2019, visiting her son in jail every weekend, and still being a mom to several other kids. The strength Rosa Kelly showed through the entire ordeal was incredible. When she got up to speak on behalf of her son, pleading for the officers involved in the initial investigation to be fired, it brought tears to viewers' eyes. Rosa Kelly believed in her son so much that she sold her home to help pay for his legal bills. While Greg's original legal team failed him, his mother kept helping as much as possible. Greg ended up spending 4 years in prison. In 2019, when Greg finally was exonerated and found not guilty of the crimes the original jury found him guilty of, she got her son back. And it seemed that all her faith, sacrifices, and hard work paid off. Jonathan McCarty was also a football player, but not as skilled. And presumably, he was not as good academically either. When Greg's case was reopened, McCarty found himself in jail for a probation violation on an illegal substance case for which he ended up sentenced to 4 years in prison. However, the most terrifying news came later when it was revealed that McCarty was charged with assaulting a woman in 2016. This past makes it shocking that the police never questioned McCarty, and that Greg's attorney did not want his name mentioned in the trial. Greg and Gabri got married in 2019, with Jake officiating their wedding. Daley finally resigned from his position in 2020. Greg filed a lawsuit against the authorities who pursued the botched case and won a large undisclosed settlement. The settlement was enough for him to pay back his mother, at least. He bought her a 1.3-acre piece of property in 2023. Greg said, "Since my release from prison, I had set up many goals to achieve. One of them being to repay my mother's sacrifice of selling her home for cash, so we could afford my legal representation. After I was exonerated, I always wanted to keep her close. After his exoneration, he wanted to get his life back together. He enrolled in the University of Texas Business School's entrepreneurship program. He also invested money in his brother's trucking company and runs a small business that makes targets for axe throwing. He soon changed majors to kinesiology, hoping to use that to remain connected to athletics after losing his chance to keep playing himself. He has become an advocate for criminal justice reform. Finally, he started to get involved with the Eastern Michigan University's football program, hoping to rekindle that love. Despite all the bad things that happened to him, it seems that Greg Kelly has finally come out with a bright future ahead of him. Jonathan McCarty would likely not be charged due to a lack of evidence, but he has admitted to the crime to his friends. Case number 9. Gary Parks. For 34 years, a blaze at the old Everett Community College library that took the life of a firefighter was a mystery. The person responsible has finally pleaded guilty in court. On February 16, 1987, the Everett Community College Library in Snohomish County, Washington, was destroyed in a fire. 48-year-old firefighter Gary Parks sadly lost his life in this fire. The library was essentially a 2-story tinderbox with more than 48,000 books and 20,000 periodicals fueling the flames. The damage neared $10 million, but no one dwelled on the money. By far, what mattered most was the tragic end of the firefighter. Early that morning, an Everett police officer radioed in that he could see flames shooting 40 feet high from the EVCC campus. More than 100 firefighters descended on the college, with Gary among the first to arrive and enter the building. Gary and 5 other firefighters were cut off by a wall of flames that flashed up behind them, blocking their retreat. The fire made its move when the crew was well inside the library and running dangerously low on air. They had earlier broken with policy and decided to remain inside, while sending a couple of firefighters back to retrieve fresh air tanks. The fire not only stood between the team and safety, but it also filled the building with toxic smoke so thick that it blocked out light. Those who survived were buddy breathing, sharing the last gasps of air left in their tanks as they crawled outside beneath the worst of the flames, using the fire hose as a guide. Gary, a fire engine driver, was an 18-year veteran of the department and one of its most popular people. Balding with a bushy mustache, Gary, or also known as Parksy, was known for his energy, his love of family, his enthusiasm for sailing, and his mastery of firehouse pranks. Gary lost his life due to smoke inhalation. More than 800 fire and police officers attended a memorial service for him. The investigation into the fire swiftly determined that the EVCC fire had been deliberately set. That meant the firefighters' demise was due to a planned crime. The Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms sent a special team to Everett. Agents joined arson investigators from the city's police and fire departments in combing the ashes for clues. They had no luck and the feds left after a few weeks. Before the year was out, Everett police leaders spoke openly about having exhausted all of what they considered the viable clues. As time passed with no arrests, those who loved Gary made certain he was remembered. Every year for more than a decade, firefighters and family would gather in the February chill at the FCC campus and tell stories about the good man who was gone. There was a flurry of public activity 6 years later in 1993, when suspicion turned toward an advertising executive from Linwood who also was a serial arsonist. Paul Keller was revealed as the person using flame to terrorize people living around Puget Sound. In the span of a few months, he set dozens of fires at churches, businesses, and homes, sometimes more than one in the same night. After he was captured, he admitted to several arson cases. Keller had grown up in North Everett. He publicly became a suspect in the FCC fire after his family told investigators that in 1987, Keller had lived across the street from the college. Through his attorney, Keller, over the years, steadfastly denied involvement in the FCC arson. He also refused to talk with the detectives. The detectives confirmed that Keller had lived in an apartment across from the college, but they did not disclose that his residency came well after the library burned. Claims that he was spotted at the fire scene the next day also were not corroborated with hard evidence. A shift in the EVCC arson investigation came in 2003 when Wally Friesen, then an Everett police detective, was assigned to take a fresh look. He began by listening to tapes of emergency radio traffic from the night of the fire. The anguish in the firefighters' voices reached across the years, he later said. He was not alone in wanting answers, for Gary and for the people who loved him. The files at the time contained information on more than 50 people who over the years had been suggested as potential suspects. Each needed to be looked at anew. The evidence also needed a fresh chance to speak. The fire started in papers and books piled on the floor near a book drop inside the library. That meant it almost certainly was set after the building was emptied for the night. But who would break into a library? And what purpose could be served by setting the place on fire? The FCC arson seemed a senseless and stupid crime. Friesen asked, "Who does stupid crimes?" His best answer was kids. Friesen retired in 2011, and the investigation passed along to capable hands. For more than 3 decades, the detectives in the Everett Police Department kept close by a black and white portrait of Gary. Inside the frame, the firefighter is wearing his formal dress uniform and a thin yet friendly smile. His ever-present image at the police station was a nudge to carry on. The detectives would meet his gaze and know they must continue their search for answers, no matter how long it took. Detectives Jim Massingale and Mike Atwood developed a reputation as partners who built solid cases through hard work. Atwood worked the EVCC fire with Massingale until his partner left the department to take a job with another agency. He too listened to the emergency radio traffic from the night of the fire. He re-examined work done on all the suspects. He concluded that there was a strong circumstantial case that the fire was set by the teens who had first come under suspicion years before. He went looking for evidence. A key break came in April 2017. Atwood was at the Snohomish County Jail in Everett to assist a federal agent in questioning a suspect in an explosives case. That man already had posted bail and was gone. While standing at the booking desk, Atwood said that he recognized Elmer Nash, who by then topped his list of suspects in the EVCC arson. Nash was waiting to be booked. Atwood knew Nash from repeated encounters involving street crimes over the years. Atwood decided to try to get the suspect to talk. He knew he was taking a risk. He said, "In my mind, I am thinking, if I play this card right now and it comes out to nothing, I'm going to be back to square one." Atwood asked Nash if he was open to delaying his booking for a few hours. He had something that he wanted to discuss. Atwood recalled, he said, "The FCC fire? I almost fell over." I said, "As a matter of fact, yes." The man agreed to talk so long as they could pick up a cheeseburger on the way to Everett Police Headquarters. So they stopped by a McDonald's. At the police station, they went to an interview room and a camera was set up, but Nash fell asleep. It appeared that he may have been using illegal substances earlier. As much as he wanted to press on, to seize the momentum of the unplanned encounter and the suspect's willingness to talk, Atwood knew there was only one responsible thing to do, so he took Nash back to jail. Atwood said it made him nervous, letting him walk away. He worried the connection might be broken and the opportunity lost. The next day, Atwood went back to the jail for another try. Nash again agreed to talk. The man at first denied any role in the fire and said he could not remember much from so long ago. That went on for a while. Then Atwood asked him if he was willing to submit to a polygraph and Nash agreed. Detective Karen Kowalczyk took over while Atwood monitored via video nearby. Nash had some questions for Kowalczyk. He wanted to know what the statute of limitations would be for somebody who set the 1987 fire. Kowalczyk had questions too. She said it would be important for her polygraph test to know whether Nash had another connection to what happened at the college library in 1987. He told her that he had been on the roof of the library the night it burned. Kowalczyk had more questions. At one point, while talking about arson, she gestured with her hand as if using a lighter. Nash said it was not like that. He said with his own mouth, "matchsticks." The matchstick statement was significant because it tracked with the vision reported by Nash's teenage friend years ago. That person claimed his vision was of a blonde-haired kid lighting the library on fire using wooden matchsticks. Nash reportedly performed poorly on the polygraph. The detectives agreed Kowalczyk should continue with questioning. After about 45 minutes, Nash told her he was on the library roof that night because he and two friends had broken in, hoping to find something to steal. Nash agreed to talk some more with Atwood. They moved to a different room, the video cameras still active. Atwood said he needed to know more about the break-in, including how the teens got inside the library. Nash initially said he did not remember. They fenced a bit before details were offered. The man wanted to negotiate at one point, saying he would admit to breaking into the library, but not to setting the fire. Atwood believed that the fire was set to destroy evidence. The burglars feared leaving fingerprints. Atwood told Nash that was ridiculous. The library was visited by hundreds of people each day. Fingerprints were everywhere. Atwood recalled the suspect saying, "We were 13 years old." Nash initially claimed his partners in the break-in set the fire. Atwood told him that would not cut it. A long time had passed, and many were waiting for truth. The Parks family, the firefighters who narrowly escaped, the people who then worked at the college, and the people who had long worked the case. As he talked, Atwood texted his boss, Gerard Irving, now captain overseeing investigations for Everett Police. He wrote, "Bring me Gary Parks." Irving carried the framed photo of Gary that had hung on the wall in the detectives' offices for years. Atwood showed the suspect the photo and said, "That is the firefighter. That is Gary Parks." Nash has a child, a girl who lives in another state whom he rarely gets to see. Atwood began talking about one of Gary's 2 daughters, someone he has come to know during the investigation. He spoke of the void in her life from losing her dad. He said that was true for everyone who knew Gary. Atwood said, "I told him, I know you started that fire." And something moved. He looks at me and he says, "Mike, tell his daughter that I lit this fire, and I did not mean to hurt her dad. You tell her, I lit it and it was an accident." Nash is quoted in court papers as saying, "I never meant for no one to get hurt. I was 12 years old and I was just being a dummy, being stupid, was not thinking." Nash began to cry. It appeared he had been holding that in for a long time. The April 2017 interview provided some answers about the FCC fire, but it did not close the case. By the next day, the suspect already was backing away from his recorded statement. He told the detective that he refused to go to prison for a crime he did not commit. Everett Police had more work to do. There were dozens of witnesses to track down. Atwood said that he has interviewed everybody in that case who is still alive. Memories of that time had faded for some. Recall was crisp for others. The investigation memorialized statements from 7 people who say Nash admitted to setting the blaze. It happened while he was hospitalized from a motorcycle crash not long after the fire. Most of those potential witnesses decades ago first shared with the investigators what they were told. The detective's interest in the young Nash waned after he agreed to a police interview and a polygraph not long after the fire. Atwood brought fresh eyes and the rigor of a meticulous investigation to unlock secrets and recover evidence that otherwise would have been lost to the years. Based on the new information, ATF assigned an agent who is an arson expert to assist in the investigation. She challenged assumptions. She also made certain that the 1987 determination that the fire was deliberately set remains forensically sound today. The effort included examining the buried foundations of the former library, which still bears scorch marks from the blaze 34 years ago. Atwood and Irving also interviewed serial arsonist Keller, who, after years of rebuffing detectives, agreed to sit down and talk. As he has always done, Keller denied any involvement in the EVCC fire. For 12,456 days, Gary's widow was left to wonder. So too were friends, family, and fellow firefighters, including those whose helmets began to melt as they retreated from an inferno that proved impossible to tame from the inside. On the morning of March 25, 2021, in a Snohomish County courtroom, a little more than 2 miles from where the fatal fire raged, long-denied suspicions were confirmed and became public record. Nash, a recently released convict with a long criminal history, pleaded guilty to first-degree slaying in the case. County prosecuting attorney Adam Cornell described the patience and tenacity it took to reach the point of filing criminal charges. He said, "The investigation reminds us that the flames of justice are not easily extinguished and that perseverance has a way of rewarding those who choose not to give up." Nash was then a troubled 12-year-old boy who struck the match during a burglary at the library and then dropped it on a pile of books and papers on the floor of the college's library, igniting a fast-moving blaze before he disappeared into the night. He once set a couch on fire in his home. One of Nash's friends, himself, then still a teen, also was questioned about the EVCC fire after family reported that he was claiming to have had a vision of how the blaze started. His story included details about the fire's origins, information that at the time was not widely shared. Other witnesses placed 3 young men, including Nash, outside their North Everett homes within minutes of the fire starting at the college. The teen who claimed to have had a vision about the fire went to prison a few years later after being convicted of playing a role in an unrelated case. Nash, meanwhile, was cycling in and out of prison, amassing at least 14 adult felony convictions. In court papers, he is described as never having held a regular job outside of prison or while on work release. Family members of Gary Parks, his wife, Kathy Parks, daughters, Erin Van Ree and Jennifer Parks, as well as grandchildren, watched a remote broadcast feed as the day of reckoning finally arrived. Also monitoring the proceedings were detectives and at least one retired Everett firefighter. Through his attorney, Nash said that he was knowingly and voluntarily admitting his guilt. Defense attorney Philip Sales told Judge David Kurtz, "This is a well-thought-out deal. It is not something that happened overnight." In plea negotiations, the prosecution and defense agreed to recommend a sentence lower than the standard sentencing range. Sales said that Nash understands that the judge does not have to follow the recommendation. His standard sentencing range as an adult would be 34 to 45 years in prison. Under a plea agreement that considers he was a child at the time, Nash faces more than 3 years in prison. Toward the end of the half-hour arraignment, Judge Kurtz asked Nash, "What is your plea?" Then came the words the firefighter's family had so long awaited. "Guilty, Your Honor." Judge David Kurtz sentenced Nash to 10 years in prison on May 13th, as well as community custody for the rest of his life once he is released. In doing so, the judge went above the 3.5 to 4.5 years the defense and prosecution were seeking in sentencing recommendations within the standard range for juveniles for first degree in 1987. Kurtz said he had an obligation to consider Nash's age at the time of the crime, but also his lengthy criminal record and the safety of the community. Kurtz said, "Today, the court is sentencing a grown man who sadly appears to have not fully grown up." Family, friends, and firefighters had urged the judge to sentence Nash to prison for much longer than the original plea deal called for. They wanted decades to life. The standard sentencing range, had he committed the same crime as an adult, was 34 to 45 years in prison.